Continents were once separate worlds, unknown to each other. An anonymous sailor in the 1400s called the sea a road to unknown worlds, and he was right. This is the story of 20 maritime revolutions that broke through ancient barriers and redrew the map of humanity. You will discover the key technological leaps and daring voyages that connected East and West, transforming everything from economies to the spread of ideas. How did a simple triangular sail allow ships to work with the wind? What gave navigators the confidence to leave the coastline behind forever? We will uncover the ships, the tools, and the people who dared to sail beyond the horizon. Their courage expanded our world in ways that still shape our interconnected lives today. What does their relentless drive to explore reveal about our own potential? A single triangular sail could change the destiny of continents. Picture a small Mediterranean dhow, its crew watching with disbelief as their vessel, armed with a strange angled sail, sliced through the water against the wind. Where a traditional square-rigged ship would be helplessly stalled, this ship moved forward with purpose. This was the power of the lateen sail, a revolutionary design that medieval Europe borrowed from Arab traders. Its secret was not just its shape, but its mobility. Mounted on a long yard that could pivot around the mast, the sail acted like a wing, creating lift and allowing a ship to sail at an angle into the wind, a maneuver known as tacking. This was not a minor improvement, it was a complete transformation of what was possible at sea. As maritime historian Dr. Elena Rossi explains, the lateen sail was more than a piece of technology, it was a cultural bridge. Its journey from the Indian Ocean into the Mediterranean symbolizes a transfer of knowledge that would redefine exploration. Suddenly, a captain's world grew larger. No longer were voyages dictated solely by the direction of the prevailing wind. A ship could now venture down the coast of Africa, for instance, and its crew could have confidence that they could work their way back home, zigzagging against the very winds that once would have trapped them. This simple triangular marvel gave sailors the courage to venture farther than ever before, setting the stage for even greater leaps into the unknown. But to truly leave the coastline behind, they would need another kind of revolution, one that guided them when the land had vanished from sight. That floating needle was more than a tool, it was a new kind of certainty. On a moonless night or in the heart of a tempest, when the stars vanished and the world became a chaotic, watery darkness, the compass remained. Its steady northern pull gave sailors a fixed point in a spinning universe. This was the magnetic compass, and its arrival in medieval Europe was nothing short of a navigational miracle. While earlier cultures had understood the principles of magnetism long before, it was in the hands of Mediterranean sailors that this knowledge became a daily lifeline. Early versions were simple, a magnetized needle attached to a sliver of wood and floated in a bowl of water, but even this basic setup was transformative. Venetian merchant logs speak of it with reverence, calling it the stone that shows the way. It was their secret weapon, allowing their ships to break free from the shoreline. The technology evolved quickly. The floating needle gave way to the dry pivot compass, mounted on a pin and housed in a box. Later, the gimbal suspension was added, a clever set of rings that kept the compass level even as the ship pitched and rolled in heavy seas. This steady reference point then merged with another innovation, the Portolan chart. These were not like symbolic medieval maps, they were practical, detailed sailing instructions filled with room lines radiating from central points. A navigator could plot a course from one port to another by simply following a specific room line and using his compass to maintain the correct bearing. It was the birth of true course plotting. This new precision transformed trade routes across the North Sea and the Baltic. Cargo ships laden with wool, timber, and grain could now cross open water with a confidence that was previously unimaginable, weaving a dense web of commerce that built the wealth of maritime empires. For the first time, reliable direction became a tradable commodity, a foundational element of global trade. Yet, knowing which way to sail was only half the battle. To truly conquer the oceans, sailors needed to answer a far more daunting question. How far had they gone? The heavens themselves became a map, one that could be read with brass and wood. High on the deck of a Portuguese caravel, a pilot would lift his astrolabe, an intricate disc of metal etched with scales and charts. He would sight along its moving parts to measure the angle of the sun at its highest point. That single number, the sun's altitude, told him his latitude, his precise position north or south of the equator. This was not magic, but applied science, a knowledge system with roots in ancient Greece and perfected by Islamic astronomers. For the first time, the ocean was no longer a featureless plain. It had invisible lines, a grid defined by the cosmos. Alongside the complex astrolabe, sailors also used its simpler, more robust cousin, the cross staff. A navigator would slide a wooden crosspiece along a main staff until its top shadow met the horizon and its bottom shadow lined up with the sun. The marked staff then gave him the same crucial angle. One instrument was a masterpiece of craftsmanship, the other a model of practical genius. Both achieved the same revolutionary end. They turned celestial bodies into a reliable navigation tool. Manuscripts from the school of Prince Henry the Navigator detail how his pilots practiced with these devices, transforming theoretical astronomy into a daily shipboard routine. This new ability to fix one's position eased the greatest uncertainty of any deep water voyage, the concern of drifting far from known routes. A captain who discovered a new island chain, like the Azores, could now record its latitude with confidence, knowing he or others could find it again. This repeatability is what transformed random wanderings into systematic exploration. It built a cumulative knowledge of the world, one carefully measured degree at a time. With the sky now a dependable guide, the stage was set for the most important piece of the puzzle, the ships that could carry this knowledge across the globe. While the astrolabe charted a course by the stars, it was the sturdy cog that carried the weight of Europe's new economy. Picture its high, clinker-built sides riding low in the water, a mountain of timber and grain secured within its deep hold. This was not a ship for delicate exploration, but a floating fortress of commerce, built for one purpose: to move massive quantities of goods reliably across the challenging waters of the North Sea and the Baltic. Emerging around the 10th century, the cog's design was a masterclass in practical engineering. Its flat bottom allowed it to settle safely on tidal mudflats for easy loading and unloading, a crucial feature for the shallow ports of the Hanseatic League. But its most revolutionary feature was mounted at the stern, the sternpost rudder. Unlike the older side-steering oars, this central rudder gave the helmsman unprecedented control, allowing the heavy vessel to respond more predictably in stormy conditions. Records from northern shipwrights detail how the cog's volumetric capacity, often exceeding 100 tons, fundamentally changed the math of medieval trade. By slashing the cost of moving bulk goods, a single voyage could turn a profit that would have required 3 or 4 journeys in older vessels. This efficiency fueled an explosion of urban growth in ports from London to Novgorod, creating the financial backbone for entire cities. Yet, the wealth it carried also made it a focus for attention. Soon, defensive wooden platforms were added fore and aft, turning these merchant ships into formidable, temporary strongholds against the ever-present concern of raiders. It was the cog's relentless, reliable service that wove together regions like Flanders and Scandinavia, which had previously existed in relative isolation. Its ability to haul heavy cargo across routes like the stormy English Channel cemented the trade alliances of the Hanseatic League, creating a level of economic interdependence Northern Europe had never known. This robust workhorse proved that the sea could be a dependable highway for commerce, but the next leap would require a vessel built not for the relative safety of northern seas, but for the vast and unpredictable open ocean. The Caravel was a master of the wind, a vessel built for a world without maps. On the deck of a 50-ton caravel off the West African coast, a captain had options. He could order his crew to adjust the rigging, shifting from the power of square sails for a following wind to the agility of lateen sails for beating against it. This modular design was its genius, a hybrid approach born from adapting Portuguese fishing boats for the ultimate challenge, the open ocean. Its shallow draft allowed it to venture into uncharted inlets and river mouths where larger, deeper ships would run aground, while its robust, lightweight frame could withstand the punishing swells of the Atlantic. Chroniclers of the age wrote of its nimbleness and speed with a sense of awe, qualities that made previously unimaginable journeys a reality. A voyage like Vasco da Gama's epic trip around the Cape of Good Hope to India depended on this very versatility, enabling his fleet to sail for weeks without sighting land and without the constant need to find a safe harbor for resupply. This was not just a new ship, it was a new strategy. The Caravel represented a shift from repurposed cargo carriers to vessels designed from the keel up for the specific task of exploration. Its success convinced monarchs that investing in maritime ventures was not a gamble, but a calculated step toward unimaginable wealth and influence. These agile ships became the physical key that unlocked the coastline of Africa and eventually the Americas, redrawing the globe in the process. But the knowledge gained on these daring voyages was useless if it could not be accurately preserved and shared, creating an urgent need for a revolution not in shipbuilding, but in cartography itself. A Venetian cartographer's ink-stained fingers traced a line from one compass rose to another, weaving a web of certainty across the parchment. This was the Portolan chart, a 13th-century leap from symbolic legend to navigational reality. Where traditional world maps might place Jerusalem at the center surrounded by mythical beings, the Portolan chart was intensely practical. It showed coastlines with a new focus on accuracy, its whole purpose to answer a sailor's most pressing questions. Where is the next safe harbor? How long is the journey? What unseen challenges wait along this shore? The secret to its precision lay in those radiating lines known as room lines. Each one marked a constant compass bearing, a direct path a vessel could hold from one point to another. A navigator would choose a destination, align a ruler along the matching room line, and then use a magnetic compass to sail that exact heading across open water. The oldest surviving example, the Carta Pisana, is not admired for its artistry but for its clear functionality. It speaks a language of use, not belief, with port names and notes about navigational challenges written in the common tongue of sailors, not the scholarly Latin of monks. This was a map made by seafarers for seafarers. Its influence was immediate and profound in intricate, island-rich seas like the Aegean. A captain could now chart a course that carefully steered clear of known areas of concern, whether submerged rocks or places frequented by those with harmful intent. This new precision standardized maritime knowledge, turning what was once a pilot's private experience into a shared, verifiable resource. Merchant confidence grew as a reliable map lessened the chance of costly mistakes and lengthy delays. But perhaps the Portolan chart's greatest legacy was its ability to evolve. Each returning voyage brought fresh information, and mapmakers eagerly wove these discoveries into new editions. The coast of Africa gradually extended southward on these charts, and distant islands like the Azores appeared for the first time. These maps did not just record the known world, they actively expanded its edges, their blank spaces and unfinished coastlines standing as a quiet invitation to the next generation of explorers. They laid the essential cartographic groundwork for an even more ambitious vessel, one being built in the very shipyards that relied on these charts, the Mighty Carrack. The Carrack was a floating city of wood and sail, a behemoth built to conquer distance itself. Imagine the sheer scale of a vessel like Portugal's São Gabriel, its high fore and stern castles towering over the waves as it rounded the Cape of Good Hope. This was not merely a ship, it was a self-contained world capable of sustaining its crew for a year or more on a single, monumental voyage. The Carrack's genius was its hybrid design, a masterful synthesis of northern and southern maritime traditions. It borrowed the deep, capacious hull and the crucial sternpost rudder from the cog, granting it immense storage for cargo and supplies. From the Caravel, it adopted the versatile multi-masted rig, combining the raw driving power of square sails on the mainmast with the precise, windward capability of lateen sails on the mizzen. Naval historians point to this rigging as the key to its global success. A captain could harness the strong, consistent winds of the open Atlantic with his square sails, then switch to the agile lateens to navigate the tricky, shifting monsoon patterns of the Indian Ocean. This adaptability meant a single ship could traverse the entire known world. Its role in history is etched in the names of legendary voyages. Vasco da Gama's fleet that reached India in 1498 was built around Carracks, their holds destined to be filled with pepper and cinnamon that would reap profits of 60 times the journey's cost. Later, English Carracks like the Mary Rose demonstrated how the design evolved, with cutting-edge gun ports cut into their hulls to allow heavy cannon to fire from a stable lower deck, transforming naval combat forever. The economic impact was staggering. By enabling direct, round-trip voyages to the spice sources of Asia, the Carrack broke the ancient monopolies held by overland traders. It made the maritime Silk Road a reality, funneling unimaginable wealth back to Europe and funding the rise of global empires. But keeping 100 people alive on a voyage that lasted many months required another kind of foresight, one that addressed the most basic human need, the simple act of eating. A sailor's survival and the fate of an entire voyage often rested on the contents of a simple wooden barrel. Inside was not fresh food, but salt cod, so heavily cured it was like a board of protein or hardtack biscuit that could last for years if kept dry. These were not meals of pleasure, but of pure necessity, and their reliable preservation was a quiet revolution that stretched the range of every medieval ship. The techniques were ancient, but their systematic application at sea was new. Salting and drying drew the moisture from meat and fish that bacteria needed to thrive, while pickling used vinegar to create an environment where spoilage could not easily take hold. Ship logs from explorers like Christopher Columbus frequently express a profound gratitude for these staples, noting the crew's reliance on biscuit and wine that endureth. This was not a small detail. It was the difference between a struggling, weary crew and one that could maintain its health and morale across a vast ocean like the Atlantic. Scandinavian salt cod became a foundational currency of maritime expansion, traded and stored in ports across Europe to provision outbound vessels. Later, though its full understanding was slow to arrive, the inclusion of citrus or preserved cabbage was observed to help with a common health challenge on long voyages, gradually improving the well-being of crews who spent months without fresh provisions. This logistical mastery over hunger and illness transformed the possible. A captain plotting a course to the Caribbean or the Indian Ocean could now calculate his needed provisions with confidence, knowing his crew would not be forced to land prematurely out of sheer desperation. It turned the ocean from a terrifying void into a manageable, if still dangerous, highway. This newfound endurance at sea, however, created a new problem. A ship that could sail for months and return with a fortune in spices or silver was a target. The very wealth that improved preservation made possible now demanded its own form of protection. The thunder of naval artillery announced a new era of power projection at sea. A Portuguese carrack could now unleash a powerful broadside, its hull shuddering as heavy iron shot reached out across the water from a distance. This was not about closing for close quarters conflict. It was about delivering overwhelming force before an opponent could even get near. The adaptation of gunpowder artillery for ships, beginning tentatively in the 1400s, fundamentally rewrote the rules of naval engagement. Early versions were small swivel guns mounted on the rails, but the true revolution came with the development of the gun port. This was a simple yet brilliant innovation, a hinged door cut low in the ship's hull that allowed a heavy cannon to be secured on the main deck close to the waterline. This placement gave the vessel a much lower center of gravity, preventing it from becoming unstable when firing, and turned the ship itself into a floating, mobile fortress. Historians note the pivotal Battle of Deu in 1509, where a combined Portuguese fleet used its superior, integrated firepower to decisively overcome a much larger force, securing their dominance over the crucial Indian Ocean spice routes. This victory was not just a military success, it was a demonstration of a new technological reality. The standardization of cannonballs was another quiet logistical triumph. By ensuring that shot was a uniform size, a fleet could be resupplied from any friendly outpost across the globe, from Goa to Malacca, making sustained naval campaigns possible thousands of miles from home. This maritime arms race did more than protect merchant convoys from those who would seek to intercept them. It became a tool of diplomacy. A powerful fleet could now anchor outside a hesitant port city, and without firing a single shot, strongly encourage a change in trade policy. The ability to project power so decisively secured the trade monopolies that funded the Portuguese and Spanish empires, reshaping global politics around naval supremacy. This security, established with gunpowder and iron, allowed the real prize to flow freely, but managing the immense wealth from these new global trades would require its own sophisticated revolution. A Venetian merchant's signature on a single parchment could transform a potential disaster into a manageable setback. In the crowded coffeehouses of medieval Italy, a new kind of contract began to circulate, one that promised security against the sea's many uncertainties. This was the birth of maritime insurance, a financial revolution that turned the immense risk of long-distance trade into a calculated business expense. At its heart was a simple but powerful idea, the collective sharing of risk. Early instruments like the bottomry loan illustrate this perfectly. An investor would provide a loan to a ship owner for a voyage, but if the ship was lost, the debt was forgiven. If it returned safely, the investor received his capital back plus a substantial premium. This system aligned everyone's interests, encouraging the flow of capital toward the very voyages that seemed most daring, like those heading down the uncharted coast of Africa. As noted in economic histories of the period, this practice was formalized in bustling maritime centers from Genoa to London, creating a safety net that fueled the entire commercial revolution. The mechanics were sophisticated for their time. A merchant would take out a policy based on a detailed inventory of his ship's cargo, its value carefully assessed. Bills of exchange allowed for the transfer of funds across great distances, while the risk was distributed among multiple underwriters, each signing their name and committing to a portion of any potential setback. This meant that even if a vessel carrying silk and spices vanished in a storm, the financial shock was absorbed by the many, not borne by a single individual. Markets could remain stable and trade could continue uninterrupted. This financial innovation did more than just protect existing wealth. It democratized the very process of exploration. A smaller merchant who could never afford to fund an entire caravel himself could now buy a share of the risk and the reward. This opened global trade to a much wider pool of investors, accelerating the flow of goods and ideas in a way that centralized royal funding alone never could. The safety net of insurance gave merchants the confidence to send their ships toward the horizon, knowing that a single misfortune would not mean their end. With capital now flowing so freely toward the docks, the pressure mounted to move those precious cargoes from ship to shore with ever greater speed. The sheer weight of a cargo hold could now be lifted by a single turning wheel. In the bustling port of Bruges, a new sound joined the cries of gulls and merchants, the steady creak of a massive wooden crane. Inside its framework, two men walked endlessly, powering a giant treadmill that hoisted netted bales of wool from the deck of a cog and swung them safely onto the quay. This was the dock and crane, an 11th maritime revolution that transformed chaotic waterfronts into efficient engines of trade. Before their widespread adoption in the 13th century, unloading a ship was a slow, difficult process reliant on groups of laborers and precarious gangplanks, a system where precious goods could easily be damaged. The invention of the permanent stone dock, combined with these powerful mechanical cranes, changed everything. Port records from cities like Gdansk note that their great crane, a landmark of timber and muscle, could lift loads of several tons, moving heavy barrels of wine or entire timber beams with a control that manual labor simply could not match. This was not merely a labor-saving device, it was a logistical miracle that slashed the turnaround time for ships from weeks to mere days. A merchant watching his spices being unloaded in Venice could now calculate his profits with new certainty, knowing his goods would reach the warehouse intact and without lengthy, costly delays. This infrastructure leap turned ports into true hubs, seamlessly linking the sea lanes of a carrack arriving from the east with the river barges and carts that carried goods inland. The efficiency rippled outward, fostering explosive urban growth in maritime cities from Hamburg to Genoa. By making the transfer of goods faster, safer, and cheaper, docks and cranes gave merchants the predictability they needed to establish regular shipping schedules. This reliability wove the economies of distant continents closer together than ever before, ensuring that the wealth carried across the oceans could flow swiftly from the ship to the market. But with goods now moving at this unprecedented speed, a new question emerged for the merchants funding these voyages. How could they possibly keep track of it all? A sailor's only measure of progress was a rope and a prayer. Thrown astern, a weighted wooden log would hold its place in the water as the ship sailed away, pulling a knotted line from a reel in his hands. His job was to count the knots that slipped through his fingers during a fixed time measured by a sandglass, and that number gave him the ship's speed. This was the log and line, a humble tool that became the heartbeat of dead reckoning. It answered the fundamental question of any long voyage: how far have we come, when the sky was a blanket of gray and the stars offered no answers? Originating from earlier Dutch and Portuguese practices, its widespread adoption in the late medieval period gave navigators a continuous, if approximate, sense of their position. Piloting manuals from the era speak of its vital role, noting that by the log alone we keep our course across the vast and featureless expanse of the Atlantic. The system's power lay in its standardization. The knots were typically spaced 47 feet apart, and the sandglass was designed to measure a run of precisely 30 seconds. The number of knots that ran out in that half-minute translated directly into nautical miles per hour, a unit of speed we still call knots today. This simple act of counting, repeated hour after hour, day after day, allowed the ship's scribe to meticulously mark a course on his chart. He would note the compass bearing and the estimated distance traveled since the last reading, advancing a small marker across the parchment in a practice known as dead reckoning. The path was an educated estimate, a cumulative calculation vulnerable to the push of unseen currents and the pull of unseen winds, but it was a guess informed by careful data. It transformed a voyage from a blind drift into a managed journey. A captain sailing from the Azores toward the Caribbean could now maintain a general sense of his westerly progress, trusting his log entries to tell him when to finally turn south. This continuous tracking built a navigator's confidence, enabling him to commit to routes that spent weeks beyond the sight of any landmark. The relentless accumulation of this data did more than just plot a single course. It began to reveal the hidden rivers within the sea, the powerful ocean currents that could either hasten a journey or conspire to send a ship far from its intended path. That Portuguese navigator, his hand steady on the tiller, could feel the ocean itself working for him. He was not just sailing on the water, but riding a hidden river within it, the Canary Current, as it swept his caravel southward along the West African coast. This was a knowledge revolution built not in shipyards, but in the lived experience of countless voyages, the systematic mapping of ocean currents and wind patterns. Sailors began to treat the atmosphere and the seas not as chaotic forces, but as a predictable system of global highways. They learned the rhythm of the trade winds, those reliable easterlies that filled their sails on the outward journey to the New World, and the powerful westerlies that would carry them home on a northern arc back to Europe. This understanding of the Atlantic gyre transformed a potentially difficult crossing into a navigable circuit. Maritime diaries from Portuguese pilots are filled with this hard-won environmental intelligence, notes on how to catch a current or avoid a windless calm. This oral tradition was eventually written down into rudders, practical books of sailing directions that passed from one captain to the next. Within their pages, a young pilot could learn the precise timing of the Indian Ocean monsoons. He would know to set sail from Arabia for India with the summer's southwestern wind, and then plan his return for the winter, harnessing the northeastern monsoon. This was not just a matter of convenience, it was the foundation of entire economies. A merchant in Lisbon could now dispatch his fleet to the Caribbean with a high degree of confidence in its return date, knowing his captains understood how to harness the Gulf Stream for a faster journey home. This optimization slashed journey times, saved vital supplies, and dramatically boosted the profitability of every voyage. It wove a new layer of predictability into the fabric of global trade, ensuring that silks, spices, and silver moved on a schedule dictated by the planet itself. Yet, mastering the winds and currents was only half the challenge, for the success of these long voyages ultimately rested on the health and cohesion of the communities who sailed them. A ship's surgeon knew his true adversary was not the open ocean, but the unseen illness that could quietly overtake an entire crew. On the dark, cramped lower deck of a Spanish galleon, his tools were simple yet revolutionary: a barrel of vinegar for washing down surfaces, a store of dried citrus, and the authority to separate a feverish sailor from his companions. These practices, drawn from a growing body of maritime medicine that blended European and Arabic texts, marked a quiet but critical shift in survival at sea. Naval records from voyages like Magellan's famous journey tell a clear story where earlier expeditions might see half their men affected by sickness. but newer approaches saw that number begin to fall. The surgeons' focus on basic cleanliness, using vinegar as a cleansing wash and ensuring better airflow below decks, helped curb the spread of common ailments that thrived in close quarters. Perhaps the most famous, though not yet fully understood, innovation was the gradual inclusion of citrus fruits like lemons and limes into the standard ration. Observant captains noted that crews with access to these fruits seemed far less touched by the widespread health challenges of long voyages. This was not yet a complete cure, but a practical response to a visible problem. The impact was profound. A healthier crew could maintain sails, operate pumps, and remain effective for months longer, turning a vessel from a place of widespread sickness back into a capable ship. This focus on preserving the crew's well-being was an investment in the voyage itself, recognizing that human endurance was as vital as wind and timber. It extended the effective range of every mission and saved countless lives from the quiet threat of shipboard illness. With their physical health increasingly safeguarded, sailors on these immense journeys now turned to another essential comfort, one that addressed the fears of the soul as much as the ailments of the body. That classroom in sagas held a new kind of treasure, one that could not be plundered but only shared. Here, under the patronage of Prince Henry the Navigator, seasoned pilots and cartographers gathered not as rivals, but as collaborators, transforming scattered maritime experience into a formal body of knowledge. This was the Navigational School, an institution that professionalized the art of exploration itself. Its curriculum was intensely practical, blending mathematics, astronomy, and the latest cartography. A young student would learn to calibrate an astrolabe, interpret the complex web of room lines on a Portolan chart, and calculate a ship's estimated position using the principles of dead reckoning. The school's greatest asset was its living library of rutters, the detailed logs from returning captains that chronicled coastlines, wind patterns, and hidden dangers. As one historian of the period notes, this systematic collection of data turned individual discovery into collective wisdom, allowing Portugal to master the route down the African coast in a single generation rather than a century. The success of a voyage like Bartolomeu Dias's rounding of the Cape of Good Hope in 1488 was not a stroke of luck, it was the direct result of this rigorous, standardized training. Pilots were no longer simply following their gut, they were executing carefully planned missions based on accumulated intelligence. This educational revolution created a self-reinforcing cycle of improvement, where each successful journey provided more data to refine the training for the next. It fostered a culture where collaboration and shared learning accelerated innovation across Europe's seafaring nations. With this powerful, systematized knowledge now flowing from the classroom to the helm, the next logical step was to build entire economic systems around it, leveraging hard-won navigational skills into unprecedented commercial gain. A single share certificate could fund an empire. In the taverns and counting houses of Amsterdam and London, a new kind of crowd gathered, not of seasoned sailors, but of shopkeepers, guildmasters, and widows, all pooling their savings to buy a tiny piece of a voyage to the East Indies. This was the Joint Stock Company, a financial engine that transformed maritime exploration from a royal gamble into a public enterprise. It evolved from earlier medieval partnerships, but its genius was in its scale and permanence. Instead of a few wealthy merchants backing a single ship, a joint stock company could raise capital from hundreds, even thousands of small investors, each buying a tradable share of the entire venture. As economic historians point out, this model opened up wealth creation in a way previously unimaginable. An ordinary baker in London could now own a fractional stake in a fleet rounding the Cape of Good Hope, sharing in the rewards when that ship returned laden with pepper and porcelain. This pooled resource allowed for sustained, ambitious operations that were far beyond the reach of any single monarch's treasury. The English Muscovy Company, for instance, funded repeated expeditions into the Arctic, searching for a northeast passage to Asia, a long-term project no individual could have financed alone. The mechanics were elegantly simple. The company would issue shares, and the capital raised would fund everything from building specialized ships to establishing fortified trading posts overseas. When profits came in, they were distributed to shareholders as dividends, rewarding the investors and attracting even more capital for the next voyage. This created a virtuous cycle of funding, turning sporadic, ad hoc expeditions into reliable, repeating trade routes. The most famous example, the Dutch East India Company, became so powerful it could mint its own coinage, negotiate treaties, and maintain its own security forces, all under a corporate banner. This structure did more than just fund ships. It institutionalized maritime enterprise, building the enduring global networks that underpin modern capitalism. With such immense capital now flowing through these corporate channels, a new question of order emerged. How could this complex web of investment and trade be managed and protected across the vast, open expanse of the ocean? A quiet courtroom in medieval Barcelona held the power to decide the fate of fortunes. Here, a panel of maritime experts, not royal judges, would listen to a Genos merchant and a Catalan ship captain discuss a cargo lost to a storm. Their ruling would not be based on a king's decree, but on the established principles of the Consulate of the Sea, a comprehensive legal code that had evolved from centuries of custom. This was the rise of maritime law, a system designed to bring order to the inherent unpredictability of ocean travel. Its roots stretched back to collections like the 12th century Rolls of Oleron, which began as a record of the established practices of wine traders crossing the Bay of Biscay. These codes answered the most pressing questions of commerce at sea. If a captain had to part with valuable cargo to save his ship from a storm, who should bear the cost? The principle of general average declared that all parties who owned cargo on that voyage would share the loss proportionally, a powerful incentive for cooperation among merchants who had never met. Similarly, the codes clearly defined a sailor's right to wages, even if a ship did not complete its journey, protecting the crews who faced the uncertainties of the sea. Legal scholars note that the widespread adoption of these laws, from the Hanseatic ordinances in the Baltic to the Mediterranean consulate codes, created a common language of commerce. A Dutch merchant could now enter a contract with a Venetian ship owner, both confident that their rights and responsibilities were clearly outlined in a legal framework recognized in distant ports. This predictability was the bedrock of trust, encouraging investment and partnership across cultural and political divides. The law even mandated a duty to render aid to other vessels facing difficulty, formalizing a code of conduct that made the sea a slightly less lonely and hazardous place. By transforming unpredictable disputes into manageable legal procedures, maritime law built the silent infrastructure for global trade, proving that reliable agreements were just as vital as reliable ships. This legal framework gave merchants the confidence to commit their wealth to the waves, but to fully unlock the potential of these new trade routes, the vessels carrying that wealth needed to evolve once more, becoming true masters of every sea condition. A ship's greatest enemy was often invisible, clinging to the hull below the waterline. In the warm tropical waters of the Caribbean or the Indian Ocean, a living layer of barnacles and shipworms would slowly but relentlessly gather on the wooden planks, turning a sleek vessel into a sluggish, weakened hulk. The late medieval answer to this silent challenge was as brilliant as it was simple: copper sheathing. Shipwrights in dry dock would meticulously nail thin sheets of copper plate over the entire underwater hull, creating a protective barrier that repelled these persistent organisms. Naval records from Spanish shipyards detail the dramatic results. A galleon trading with the Philippines, once forced to careen every few months to clear its encrusted hull, could now sail for years without such demanding maintenance. The benefits were twofold. First, it drastically cut down on the time-consuming and expensive process of careening, where a ship was deliberately heeled over in a secluded bay so its crew could manually scrub the bottom, a vulnerable and laborious task. Second, and perhaps more crucially, it preserved the ship's hydrodynamic integrity. A clean, smooth hull sliced through the water with far less resistance, maintaining the speed and maneuverability that were vital for both navigating uncertain waters and meeting tight sailing schedules. This was not a minor upgrade, it was a transformative leap in operational efficiency. The initial cost of the copper was high, but the return on investment for a shipowner became clear over time. A sheathed vessel could complete more profitable voyages between major overhauls, its structural health preserved and its sailing performance kept consistently sharp. This durable innovation extended the effective life and range of every ship it protected, ensuring that the vessels connecting the world were not only capable of the journey, but could make that journey again and again. With ships now shielded from the slow wear of the sea itself, the final revolutions could focus on the ultimate purpose of all this ingenuity, the profound human impulse to push beyond the last known horizon. A lone Basque harpooner balanced on the prow of his Tizalupa, his entire world narrowed to the dark shape moving beneath the Atlantic swell. His success, and that of hundreds of crews like his, would transform the ocean from a barrier into a global larder. This was the 19th Maritime Revolution, the explosive growth of fishing and whaling fleets, an industry that began along European coastlines but soon reached across the world. From the 1400s onward, these were not mere food-gathering trips, they were large-scale industrial enterprises. Basque whalers led the way, developing stronger harpoons and robust ships that could withstand the challenging conditions of the North Atlantic, venturing as far as the waters off Iceland and Labrador in pursuit of their quarry. The prize was not just meat but oil, a clean-burning fuel for lamps that lit entire cities, and baleen, a flexible material used in everything from everyday garments to fishing rods. This demand created a powerful economic engine. Fishery records from English ports like Bristol detail the remarkable volume of the cod trade, with ships crossing to the rich grounds of Newfoundland and returning with holds so full they could supply nourishment for vast urban populations for months. The fishermen themselves became unsung explorers, their detailed knowledge of currents, weather, and coastlines often preceding official maps. They established seasonal processing camps on distant shores where they salted and dried their catch right on the beaches, a preservation technique that allowed the valuable food to survive the long journey to inland markets. These temporary settlements, like those on the coast of Greenland, often evolved into permanent communities, creating new nodes of cross-cultural contact. European fishermen traded with indigenous communities, exchanging metal goods for furs and local knowledge, a quiet but constant exchange that broadened the horizons of both groups. This scaled-up harvesting of the sea did more than just feed empires and fund further voyages. It wove a dense, practical knowledge of the North Atlantic into the fabric of maritime commerce, proving that the ocean's greatest wealth was not always in spices or silver, but in the sustainable resources that could power daily life across continents. The determined pursuit of fish and whale oil mapped unknown waters and fostered a new kind of maritime economy, one built on the abundant, if hard-won, treasures of the deep. A Portuguese captain stood on the deck of the São Gabriel, the sense of Calicut spice markets washing over him, a world away from the familiar shores of Lisbon. This moment in 1498 was more than a successful voyage. It was the final, decisive link in a chain of maritime revolutions. Vasco da Gama's arrival in India fused the separate circulatory systems of the Atlantic and Indian Oceans into a single, global heartbeat of commerce. For the first time, European goods could sail directly to the source of the spices and silks that had trickled westward for centuries through a long line of overland intermediaries. The shock was felt on both sides. Portuguese chroniclers wrote of their awe at the wealth and sophistication of Indian port cities, while local merchants quickly grasped that the old rules of trade had been permanently rewritten. The immediate impact was a dramatic collapse in costs. A pound of pepper, which once required a long and costly journey across deserts and through many territories, could now be shipped by sea for a fraction of the price. This single sea route ignited an economic transformation that shifted the center of global power. Wealth and influence began to move away from the Mediterranean and the overland Silk Road, flowing instead toward the new Atlantic nations of Portugal, Spain, England, and the Netherlands, who now controlled the maritime highways. But the exchange was far more than commercial. The ships that sailed back to Europe carried more than pepper. They carried the very building blocks of modern life. New world crops like the potato and maize crossed the oceans, eventually revolutionizing agriculture and supporting population growth across Europe and Asia. In the other direction, Eurasian technologies, from advanced metalworking to new shipbuilding techniques, spread to new continents. This was not a gentle meeting, but a powerful fusion that brought both extraordinary opportunity and significant change, including new health considerations and the evolution of long-standing social orders. Yet, its ultimate consequence was the irreversible creation of an interconnected world. This final maritime revolution did not merely expand trade, it inaugurated the early modern era, proving that human ingenuity, once set upon the waves, could dissolve the ancient barriers of geography and reshape our collective destiny. Having journeyed through these 20 revolutions, from the simple Latin sail to this moment of global connection, we can now see their true legacy. It is written in the map of our world, in the food we eat, and in the interconnected lives we lead today. Their story is a powerful reminder that the courage to sail beyond the horizon does not just discover new lands, it forever expands the possibilities of humanity itself. Our voyage through these 20 maritime revolutions brings us back to the beginning, to a world once separated by vast, unknowable oceans. We have watched as a simple triangular sail gave sailors the confidence to challenge the wind itself, as a magnetic needle offered certainty in a starless sky, and as the sturdy carrack became a self-sufficient world capable of circling the globe. This was not merely a series of inventions, but a profound transformation of human possibility. The medieval world, once a collection of isolated shores, was woven into a single, intricate web of connected civilizations. The courage to sail beyond the horizon did more than just map new coastlines. It ignited economic growth on an unprecedented scale, fostered a constant flow of ideas and cultures, and laid the foundation for the global empires that would shape the modern age. The legacy of those daring voyages is written into the very fabric of our interconnected lives today, from the food on our tables to the global networks that power our world. As we reflect on the sailors who ventured into the unknown with little more than ingenuity and resolve, we can see a mirror of our own quest to push boundaries, whether in the vastness of space or the digital frontiers of our time. Their story is a timeless reminder that exploration is a fundamental human drive, and that collaboration and adaptation can turn the greatest barriers into bridges. We would love to hear which of these maritime revolutions amazed you the most, or how this history of discovery inspires your own adventures. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for sailing with me through this epic tale of human ingenuity. If you enjoyed the voyage, do not forget to subscribe for more journeys into the past that illuminate our present.